What's up, Flannelverse? We are back for Thursday Night Football, first game of Week 6, 49ers at Seahawks, Thursday Night Football. I'm here with Adam, ShipMyMoney Scherer, to break the game down. Adam, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Looking forward to more football. Been a good season so far.
You're going to the game this weekend, right?
Yeah, going to the Commanders-Ravens game. So not sure if I'm playing Sunday, which sucks.
Oh,
but,
really? You might take the whole slate off?
Well, they gave us field passes too, so we have to be there like an hour before the game. And
Yeah, it's
so
tough.
I'll probably end up playing, but not as much volume because I'm not gonna be around to swap anything or deal with any inactives or anything like that.
Yeah, that does make it kind of tough. I always have that struggle when I want to go to live games, like
Yeah.
Timberwolves games. When I have Timberwolves partial Timberwolves season tickets. Like every time I go to a game, I'm like, I really want to play DFS, but also, I mean, NBA, it's even worse, where it's like
Right.
I can't really do all of the late swaps while I'm there. Yeah,
Yeah. At NBA, you can't do it.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. Yeah,
It almost makes it easier because the decision is just like,
yeah.
am I going to go to the game? Like, I don't have to figure out how I'm doing anything else because I can't play.
I mean, I used to do it. I used to try and play while I was there, but it was like I can't enjoy the game because I'm just constantly on my phone looking
Right.
like, do I need to make an update? Because I can't. Like, I've been able to use an optimizer on my phone in the past, so I figured out a way to do it where I could late swap and stuff. But it's just like I'm just focused on my phone the whole time, and yeah, I wouldn't know how to do it with any of the current optimizers I'm using or like SaberSim, anything like that. So yeah, that makes it pretty tough. But that's fun. Should be a really fun game.
Yeah, it should be a great game, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it has the highest total on the slate. All right. Well, we are going to break down Thursday Night Football. And of course, if you're here, we are not streaming to Endgame. So if you're here, you are in the Flannelverse. Would appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment. All of that is very helpful. But also, if you're not already subscribed to Endgame Syndicate, there is a link in the description for Adam's channel where he does work with Brick75, Nerdy Tenor, Utica, Davis Maddox, some of the best DFS players on the planet doing some work over there. I know you just did a roundtable last night, Adam. How did that go?
It went well. I thought it was a good one. Yeah, the first hour or so is on our YouTube channel in front of the paywall, and then we get into the member questions and stuff behind the paywall that's posted on the Endgame site. But yeah, I thought there were good conversations there. I thought it went pretty well, so that was cool.
Nice. Yeah. So go check that out if you haven't already done so. The link is again in the description of this video, at least for the YouTube channel. If you want to sign up for Endgame Syndicate, the video from last night that is behind the paywall, you can still see it. It's going to be posted there. So you can just go to endgamesyndicate.com. And you can see Adam just posted in Twitter. You can just click that name. That's another easy way. Just click on the Endgame Syndicate comment there, and you can find Adam's YouTube channel. Go sign up there if you haven't already done so. All right, we are going to break down this game, starting again position by position, starting with the quarterbacks. And I know on the side, I do want to point out, because people have said it a couple times, on the side where it says questions and lineups at the end, that's really just I'll be doing that tonight. For this show, we don't really do the lineups, or we do take questions as we go, but there's not like a special segment at the end for building lineups and such. So just ignore that part. But for the rest of it, we are going to be going position by position here, starting with quarterbacks. And if you do have questions during the stream, you are welcome to ask them. We often get to those anyway. Two quarterbacks tonight. We have Brock Purdy and Geno Smith. Brock Purdy's 9,400, Geno Smith 9,200. As far as ownership goes, we have in the captain spot Brock Purdy coming in at 13% ownership, Geno Smith at 12.5%. So not getting those 5% owned quarterbacks like we've gotten some slates so far this year, but still coming in at, I'd say, reasonable ownership. In the flex, we have Purdy at 49%. And Geno Smith at 47%. Adam, how do you feel about these numbers? How much exposure are you getting to Brock Purdy and Geno Smith?
I think the ownership is pretty efficient for both of these guys, especially at flex. I have them both very, very marginally overowned, but for all intents and purposes, just correct. Projected for 56 to 57% on Purdy, 52 to 53 on Geno. I have Geno being optimal 51% and Purdy 56 at flex. So I think the ownership's pretty much spot on right there. And then at captain, I think they're both going a little bit underowned, but still nothing too crazy. Neither of these guys give you massive rushing upside. They both can scramble a little bit if they have to, but they're not guys that you're expecting to go out there and run for 60, 70 yards or anything like that. So generally, you are going to want to be stacking them pretty aggressively, I think. They do obviously both have good pass catchers that you can pair them with very comfortably, so that's nice. So I think they're just solid plays. Captain ownership projected around 10% or so on both of them. I think from an optimal standpoint, it's 12 to 13%, but that's kind of just arguing small differences.
Yeah, no, and agreed. I think I wanted to be stacking them. Geno's up to I want to say 29 yards per game or something on the ground so far this year, but that's a little bit of an outlier relative to recent years. I think that's probably just a little bit of a fluke. Also in favor of stacking very condensed pass catching rotations. I mean, outside of the running back. So if you're just looking at wide receivers and tight ends on this slate, outside of the top 4 on each team, nobody has gotten more than 6 targets. So it's so condensed to the top receivers that I think if these quarterbacks get there, probably bringing along some receivers. We don't have a Patrick Mahomes situation here. So like you said, I think always stacking them, probably multiple stacking partners if I have either Purdy or Geno Smith in the captain spot, because they're not that great on the ground. They don't spread the ball around a ton. So I think you do want to be stacking there. But I think the ownership seems fine. Anything else to say about the quarterbacks? I feel like quarterbacks are usually one of the more straightforward. Do you have any other thoughts?
No, I think it's pretty straightforward. I do think, Nathan in the chat said Geno had 72 rushing yards last week. Obviously you're not expecting that to be replicated probably at any point for the rest of the season, but they are, it is worth keeping that in mind with them. They are a little bit
he has that upside
as captain options than Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that just is not going to ever do that basically. So, they are clearly not in the Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels range, but can run a little bit, which is a benefit.
Yeah, I mean that obviously brought his rushing yards per game up significantly. But it's nice to know he has that kind of upside, 72 rushing yards. I don't think of that as being a Geno Smith type rushing game. But he showed that upside. So, if you wanted to get away from the double stack with Geno at captain, something like that, you could. It's more viable than Aaron Rodgers. It's a good example of somebody who doesn't really rush at all. So you could, but still, I think generally I'd prefer to have stacking and double stacking at captain.
Yeah, there are some quarterbacks that are just physically incapable of doing that. They're going to throw the ball away instead of run for 10 yards.
Yeah,
and Geno's not one of those guys.
Yeah. I do want to hit on this Baldy. I tried to make Baldy a moderator on my YouTube channel. Apparently didn't stick. I don't see the wrench next to your name either. So I don't know why that is. I double checked and it was saved there. So I'll have to adjust my settings somewhere, Baldy. But I appreciate you. I was telling Adam before the show started, I've had so many issues with bots that finally Baldy had offered. And I was like, yeah, that would be great if I could have a moderator on the channel. Hopefully we don't get bots this morning because apparently it hasn't worked yet, but I'll get that fixed before tonight's show. Thank you for pointing that out, Baldy. I thought I had another question or something here that I wanted to hit on, but I did want to just touch on this. I went off and just did rapid fired some of my bad food takes last night. Adam, do you have any hot takes as far as food takes that'll get you canceled?
No, I saw that thread and I didn't have anything interesting come to mind. I do disagree with you kind of on yours about pie.
I had a lot of them. I fired off 5 of them.
Okay, I saw the pie one, and I'm not a big dessert person, so I agreed with your overall take because I just think most desserts are overrated. But pie crust is great and probably my favorite part of the pie.
Oof. Yeah, no, we are on the opposite end. I never get excited about pie. Other people are like, ooh, I love a good pie. I'm going to go have a great pie. Lindquist called me out for being a bad Midwesterner for not loving pie, which is true. But I prefer, I'm not really a big desserts guy either. But if I'm going to have a dessert, I prefer a cake, even a cupcake, something like that.
Cheesecake's my favorite, I think.
I like cheesecake. It's not my favorite. I think I like it better than pie probably. But
I'm not, pie is, Thanksgiving or whatever. If I'm at my mom's and she made a pie, cool, I'll have a slice or whatever.
Yeah,
if
me too.
If she were oh, I didn't make pie, I'd be I don't care. Okay.
Yeah. Me too. People go crazy for their pumpkin pie and key lime pie, and I'm like, yeah, it's okay. It's not the worst thing, but I'm never excited about it. Okay. We just had to see if you had it. I'm sure everybody has a food take that a majority of people are going to hate. That's just kind of everybody's range of food is so wide, but I was I bet I could come up with 20 more of them if I really wanted to. I got kind of bored rapid firing them. Okay, we'll move on and talk about running backs. So it always gets more interesting as we get outside of quarterbacks to some other positions. Running backs here, we have Kenneth Walker and Jordan Mason at the top, projecting actually about the same here on fantasy points. Curious if that is the same everywhere. Let's see. Yeah, Jordan Mason 18, Kenneth Walker 17.5 on Roto Runners also. So pretty similar across these two sources, at least in terms of projection. We have in the flex, Jordan Mason projecting for 39% ownership, Kenneth Walker 33%. In the captain spot, we have Jordan Mason projecting for 12% ownership, Kenneth Walker 7.5. Adam, how do you feel about these ownership numbers? What's your level of interest in these two top running backs?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that like this is one of those cases with Jordan Mason where he's clearly one of the best plays on the slate in terms of like his chances of success. I do also think right now he's probably the most over-owned player, both at flex and at captain, especially when you compare him directly to Kenneth Walker right now. I have a higher ownership projection on Walker than you said. I think you said 33. I have like 37 to 38, but that's still lower than Mason, who I have at like 40. And then at captain, like 15% going to Mason, 12% going to Walker. They project almost identically for me. Walker's a little bit cheaper, and he's getting less ownership. So, I think that both clearly have a very similar range of outcomes. They have a similar median projection. I don't totally understand why Jordan Mason is the guy that is preferred here. He still has the same issues that he's had all season long, where you expect the opportunities to be there, but he's not heavily involved in the passing game. He's just going to be very dependent on getting to 100 yards, getting into the end zone. Obviously, that's less of an issue on a showdown slate than it is a main slate when he's like 35% owned and you have a million other options. But it's still a running back that, the opportunities will be there, but it's somebody that's very dependent on getting into the end zone and getting 100 yards. And neither, obviously those things are both far from guaranteed. You still have Debo that can be a pain in the ass around the goal line. You have, other guys they can go to in the red zone. You also had Mason cough away their game last week. We haven't seen exactly if there's going to be any ramifications of that in terms of his workload. Like, is Garendo going to get the ball more? Not that I think that's a huge thing. Like, I'm not like docking Mason's projection because I think he's going to like be in a timeshare now or anything. But it wouldn't be the first time that you've seen a coach just react irrationally to a big fumble. So that's like some level of risk. So I think Mason's a good play, but I think relative to Kenneth Walker, I don't really understand why Walker is getting a decent chunk less ownership than Mason.
Yeah, I'm on the exact same page. Like I just in a vacuum, looking at the roles they've had, Kenneth Walker looks like a comparable, maybe even better option to me. I mean, Jordan Mason hasn't been used at all. While you're talking, I was just looking up. I had seen a headline come across my notifications earlier that the 49ers don't see Jordan Mason as a receiving option. And I went to find this just a beat reporter reporting that he hasn't been used in the passing game. I'm like, okay, that doesn't really help. But I think it's true. Like they clearly have not shown any like inclination to use Jordan Mason in the passing game. Doesn't seem like he has a ton of upside there. Kenneth Walker, I mean, you and I did a show on the Seahawks a few weeks ago, and we talked about how like they don't really use their Kenneth Walker as a receiving back all that much. And since then, he's been used 13 targets over the past couple of games. So like they've changed the way they're using Kenneth Walker a bit. He's been a lot more involved in the passing game. On top of that, we have several quotes from the coaches over the past week, and this is all from Coach Speak Index Discord. Check it out if you haven't already done so. But offense coordinator Ryan Grubb on Kenneth Walker. I've never seen an athletic profile like that. He's special, man. He's growing every day. He's getting better, and it's scary. What's his top end looking like? You can throw the ball to him. You can utilize him in the screen game. So all of this, they're seeing him as somebody they can use in the passing game. Mike McDonald, post-game presser, said, we definitely need to get the run game going. We need to get Ken Walker the ball more. Just several quotes throughout the week. There are multiple after this as well. Both coaches being like, yeah, we need to use Kenneth Walker more. We need to run the ball more. It opens up other options for us. Nobody's questioning what we're doing. So all of the coach speak has been, yeah, we need to run the ball more. Kind of seems like they're going to give Kenneth Walker some opportunities this week. So I really like Kenneth Walker as an option. How do you feel about Walker at captain in particular, coming in at 7.5% ownership?
I think it's pretty much correct. Like he shows up. So I have him projected for like 12%. So okay. 7.5, I think is too low. Yeah. I have him optimal like 10 to 11% of the time. So if it were actually 7%, I would really like him. At 12%, I think he is fine. One thing I want to point out with him too, just for anybody kind of like eyeballing data from last week, if you just look at rushing share last week, Kenneth Walker dropped to 45.5% of the Seahawks carries. The week before he was at 86%. Week one he was at 60%. That's misleading because Geno had a 36% rushing share. So I do think that's important to point out. It wasn't Charbonnet cutting into Kenneth Walker. Charbonnet had an 18% rushing share last week, 14 the week before that, 24 week one. So like Charbonnet had, pretty similar percentage of the pie. It was just Geno Smith having more rushes that made Kenneth Walker come down. So if you are just kind of eyeballing numbers, don't let that deter you from Walker. He still very clearly had the advantage over Charbonnet, which is good to see. So I think he looks good, as a captain. And then one other thing kind of with the running backs, looking at last week, again, not that it's necessarily sticky to this week and indicative of what's going to happen tonight. Guerrero did have a season high in market share last week.
Yeah, 5 carries last week, which matched his. He's had 5 carries 2 different times, I guess, higher total market share last week. But is sort of interesting to see him get more involved. I kind of thought like he might be completely uninvolved in the last game because I think he fumbled it. The prior one of his prior touches. But no, they went right back to Guerrero a little bit last week. Let's talk about kind of these secondary options because we don't have much like great value on this slate in general. So we kind of need to lean into the little places where you can kind of make a case for players. And I feel like these are some of the better options as far as players you can sort of make a case for them. Do you want to talk about Guerrero first? Like, do you have any actual interest in Guerrero at 2,000? And what is your level of interest? And I guess we can pull up ownership on Guerrero. I assume you're not going there in the captain spot. In the flex, we have Guerrero coming in. Where is he? Up here at 8% projected ownership. How do you feel about 8% to Guerrero?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's okay. Like he's like a 5-ish% optimal guy for me. He's cheap enough where, if he does for some reason get a goal line carry and get in, like that's probably going to be pretty good for you. And I think, the biggest, when you're talking like large field showdown tournaments, the biggest case for Guerrero is what if, he actually does have a bigger role this week, because not only would that just obviously be good because you have a 2K guy with a bigger role, but it would be directly cutting into the very, very popular Jordan Mason. So it does give you that like direct leverage against a really popular play. I'm not saying I think that's going to be the case or I'm expecting that or anything like that, but like that would be the biggest sort of like macro argument in favor of Guerrero, I think, is just if this kind of unexpected thing happens, it's really powerful, not only in making your lineups better, but making your opponent's lineups worse. So I think, that would be the strongest, like highest upside case for him. But as far as things that, are most likely to happen, medium projection, all of that, at 2K, I just think he's kind of fine. Like I'm probably not going to have a lot of him. I'm probably not going to have none. I think, that 5 to 10% makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly how I feel. Like not a ton of standalone value could get a little bit more work. Potentially 5 carries is at least promising. But obviously has awesome contingent value. Like you would imagine if something happened to Jordan Mason, I think Guerrero probably is next man up, gets a lot of run, but also in a blowout. I kind of think Guerrero would be the guy who gets run in a blowout. So, there are some like veteran backups where it's like in a blowout, are they really going to use this vet? But I think Guerrero is the type where like he has that additional contingent upside. So multiple ways to potentially get there. I think he looks fine at 2,000, not like a huge priority, but I think I'll probably be overweight to the field just because of the multiple ways to contingent upside and some standalone value. I think he could break off a big play. I think he has that in his wheelhouse, but not a huge priority.
Are you okay playing him with Mason?
Yeah, I think so for sure. Just because in the blowout potential, like maybe the Niners just crush through the first 3 quarters. Mason gets to 100 and a touchdown, and then Guerrero takes over. Or just like he's 2,000, has 5 carries, one of those carries is a touchdown. Like I think I'd be okay playing them together. How about you?
Yeah, same page. Like I would prefer that like Mason be somebody that catches passes because like then you have an easier path to like Guerrero scores, but Mason also still has a good game. But ultimately, it's a 1-game slate, and like you outlined a couple of different examples, like weird stuff still just can happen. And then you also just get the benefit of your lineups are generally going to be less duped if you have 2 running backs from the same team. So you are taking on that negative, but you're getting rewarded for it basically if it works out. So, I don't really set a lot of those rules in Showdown, and I wouldn't for this one. I would prefer if like Mason caught passes, but it is what it is.
Yep. Same page there. Zach Charbonnet, another pretty interesting play here. He's 3,400 again, so he's like pretty good value on Charbonnet, coming in the flex with 23% ownership. That's the other thing I noticed. Just looking at the ownership projections, at least right now, like the better value guys aren't getting a crazy high amount of ownership. Like a lot of they're all under 25% projected ownership in multiple sources that I looked at. Nobody getting like really steamed of the value guys, which kind of intrigues me. I don't know. How do you feel about Charbonnet this week?
I think he's the best sub 4K play by a pretty big margin. 3,400 is just really cheap for him, given that he clearly has the number 2 role here behind Walker. He's going to be involved. Walker's going to clearly be the number 1 you would expect. But you also have the potential for, like you were saying from the coach speak stuff, if the rushing pie just gets larger here, then you probably do see Charbonnet get a little bit higher of a percentage because you're just talking about the raw carries that would have to go to Kenneth Walker that start to become problematic, which then just obviously means more carries for Charbonnet. So like that would clearly benefit him if the Seahawks are going to run more. Walker's the biggest beneficiary, but Charbonnet as well. And that salary is just really appealing for, somebody that is going to be involved enough. He can catch passes too, which obviously is a benefit. He's not, a true receiving back, but he'll get some targets. And then, obviously there is just variance around the goal line where we've seen Kenneth Walker get all the touchdowns lately, but I think it was week 1, Charbonnet stole one from him. That obviously is something that can happen. It's, going to happen more often probably than like initially clicks in your brain. Like it's just, it's one of those things where, obviously Kenneth Walker is the most likely guy to get goal line carries. And so there's a tendency to kind of view it as like Kenneth Walker is going to get all of the goal line carries. But it's like, no, he's going to get 80% of them or something.
Right.
So yeah, there's just a pretty clear path, I think, to him being a really good value play.
Yeah, one of the nice things about backup running backs is you always have the out of just like, well, if Kenneth Walker breaks off, has a long drive, sustained drive, maybe breaks off a run, like sometimes the running back just gets gassed in the goal line. They bring in the other guy, like just because like, well, we've used him a lot. He's kind of exhausted. Let's bring in fresh legs for this goal line carry. So you see it happen all the time where the backup running back comes in.
So you had Blake Corum get 2 carries inside the 5 last week on a drive when that's like the one thing Kyron Williams is exceptional at. Like he's not a great open field runner or anything. And it's still just like, oh yeah, Corum was on the field. We're in the red zone. Let's give him a couple carries.
Yeah. Weird stuff happens all the time. So yeah, I think Charbonnet definitely has some standalone value, 10 targets over the past 2 weeks. And then has awesome contingent upside also. So yeah, like I like him better than Garendo, obviously. Gonna have, I think I'll be overweight to the field on Charbonnet. I think he looks really great here. I don't think I have any other notes on Charbonnet. Just some standalone value, great contingent upside. I think that's all that really needs to be said about
from a
him.
narrative standpoint. I was pretty overweight on Charbonnet the week that Walker came back and had the massive game when Charbonnet was overpriced.
That's right.
So nobody was playing him. So I was really overweight on him that week. It didn't work out. It pretty much means it's a lot. He just smashes today when everybody's playing him.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely how narratives work. That is how it's going to work for Zach Charbonnet. The only other thing I was going to mention, just as far as schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, I guess I can pull that page up here. We can just look real quick at schedule adjusted fantasy points for each of these teams. San Francisco allowing basically been neutral against the run. I mean, negative 0.3 fantasy points below expectation. So not a big difference there. Seattle, where were they? I don't think there was any. Also basically neutral, negative 1.4. So 1.4 fantasy points below expectation so far. 2 running backs. It is worth noting plus 1.4. So they've actually been worse as far as giving up a little bit more than average in terms of the rush and a little bit worse in terms of receiving. So, as far as Jordan Mason, not really involved as a receiving back. So it could be argued that it's a slightly positive matchup, but basically neutral matchups for all the running backs. Nothing really standing out there. Okay, let's move on. Talk about some receivers. Move this down here. We also had some, let's see, Billy asks, capturing the touchdowns is crucial in Showdown. Which players on either side do you think is the most likely to score? It's probably the running backs. Not counting the quarterbacks, obviously, but I would think it's probably Mason and Kenneth Walker.
It's generally just going to be the guys that it always is, like number 1 running back, and then like DK and Debo.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Yeah, like obviously could be Kittle, could be Ayuk, lots of options there, but yeah, probably the best bets to me would be the running backs.
Yeah, like just from like a macro answer for that question, like obviously different teams are better at defending different things, but like there's so much volatility and variance in touchdowns that you're pretty much always, I think, just going to be right the most often by saying which guy gets the ball the most, he's the most likely to score.
Yeah. Oh, we should, sorry, use check. We should talk a little bit about use check because he's going to get a little bit of ownership, and we have such like not great options here. Use check coming in at 10.5% projected. What is your level of interest in use check?
Pretty similar to Garendo. I have juice check showing up optimal like 6 to 7% of the time. I have Garendo 5 to 6, and it makes sense because Garendo is $600 more expensive. Very similar projections, 2 to 3 fantasy points, which when you factor in standard deviation and all of that is basically the same. So yeah, just another backup running back where you're hoping that, he falls into the end zone, catches a couple of passes. I think he's fine, but not any sort of a priority.
Yeah, I think that's probably how I would describe him. Not a ton of interest in use check. I wrote him up as like a low owned play that people can consider, but like he's not even like the ownership has come up above 10%. 10 targets so far this year, 46.8% route participation. So he is at least running routes, but 0 carries so far this year. And so far, so we're through 5 weeks, 20 expected fantasy points. So that's basically 4 expected fantasy points per game for use check. Last year, total of 48.6 expected fantasy points across 20 games. So just he's not really all that involved. I kind of feel like he usually gets steamed a little bit more than he should, just because people like the name, like think of use check as being like he's going to bully his way into the end zone. I don't know, not like a huge priority for me. I'll probably be underweight to the field if he does come in at like 11%.
The way I kind of think about him versus Garendo, like I said, they have similar projections. Juice Check's median projection is a little bit higher just because of PPR. But I think that the 95th percentile range of outcomes for Garendo is a lot higher than it is for Juice Check, because I don't really know what would have to happen in this game for Juice Check to like actually take on a big role. Whereas in Garendo's case, I think it is simply that Jordan Mason gets hurt.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Use check having a big role. Like we just never seen it. Like I thought maybe he would get a bigger role when Christian McCaffrey was out, and that just has not been the case.
Yeah.
It
like
wasn't last year.
Debo's there too. Like if Mason gets hurt, I assume you're getting some kind of like split between Debo and Garendo. Like I still don't think it's gonna be like juice checking Garendo.
Yeah. So like he could vulture a goal line touchdown, certainly within use check's range of outcomes, have a couple receptions. He can get there, but like definitely not a mega ceiling.
Yeah, it's just like what the hell does the game look like where juice check scores 18 fantasy points? I know what it looks like when he scores like 8 or 9, but like what's it look like when he scores 8? Like I have no idea.
Yep. And 8 or 9 is probably enough, not necessarily enough. I don't know. Yeah, I want to point him out just because he's getting some ownership. To me, he's like getting too much ownership. I have less interest than the field in use check. All right, let's move on. Now we'll talk about receivers, and obviously, like I said, outside of the top 4 receiving options, wide receivers and tight ends for both teams, nobody has received more than 6 targets on either team. So not a ton of value here outside of the main guys, the guys that we know the names generally. Let's go team by team here. So let's start with the 49ers, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings. So I am including Juwan Jennings in those main guys. I know he might not be the type of name that we think of in the past as being a main guy for the 49ers, but this year he has been pretty good. So let's talk about Deebo, Ayuk, and Juwan Jennings to start. As far as ownership goes, we can look at both captain and flex. So in the flex, we have Deebo Samuel coming in at 33% ownership, Brandon Ayuk coming in at 34% ownership, Juwan Jennings coming in at 23% ownership. At captain, we have Deebo Samuel coming in 8% ownership, Ayuk 11%, Juwan Jennings 3%. So how do you feel about those numbers? What's your level of interest in Deebo, Ayuk, and Jennings?
Yeah, I like the pass catchers here in general. I have Deebo right now as the most under-owned captain on DraftKings, and I think that his flex ownership is pretty much correct. So overall, he's just going under owned to me, but mostly at the captain spot. We haven't really seen it so far this year where he gets, multiple touchdowns. He gets like a red zone carry or something like that. We haven't really seen it, but he's somebody that I've talked about throughout the year when we talked about Jordan Mason, where there is the Debo risk to him in the red zone, and probably at some point sooner than later you're going to see Debo getting goal line carries here and there. Obviously, he's a red zone target in general. You get all the PPR stuff as well. Hasn't been heavily targeted in his first couple of games back from injury, but I think that's probably more schematic stuff and just something that's going to even out over time. They do have other good pass catchers in Kittle and Ayuk that on a game-to-game basis can cut into that. But I think Debo looks really good, and then just all the touchdown equity he gives you makes him a really good captain option that I think just isn't getting quite enough ownership. Jennings, I think, is just going under-owned across the board, more so at flex than captain, because obviously with Debo and Ayuk and Kittle active, you kind of have to keep your expectations in check with Jennings. But I do think he's going a little bit under-owned at captain, and then more so at flex. He's only 4K. He looks really good at that price, I think. He's still, clearly involved in the passing game behind those other guys that I mentioned, but, clearly still involved. Ran routes on 63% of dropbacks last week, 63% of dropbacks the week before when Debo came back. Had an 11% target share last week, 22% the week before that. So you're going to see the target share fluctuate, but he is still going to be out there running routes. I think the price tag is just cheaper than it should be, especially in the context of a slate, like you were saying before, where you don't have a ton of really good value or necessarily mid-range plays. So I think Jennings looks good. And then Ayuk, I guess, would be the third of the three for me, just because I think his ownership is pretty efficient, both at flex and at captain. I don't think he's going wildly over-owned or anything, but there's nothing that stands out as far as I thought Debo was really going under-owned to captain and Jennings in both spots. Ayuk just kind of seems correctly owned. He is, clearly a candidate to be the number one target guy in any given game, but he does give up a little bit of touchdown equity because of the way Debo is used and because of having Kittle in the passing game. Those guys are just going to be bigger red zone threats generally. So I think Ayuk is good. I think that Debo and Jennings, for different reasons, are a little bit ahead of him for me.
Kosan, I think that we're on the same page entirely with the 49ers receivers. Debo captain just looks a little bit light there. It looks and Juwan Jennings, he's come back down to 63-64% route participation. So, not quite the same role he had with Debo out. Obviously don't love that, but also 10 targets over the past 2 weeks. So I do think to some extent, he showed what he can do, and they have continued to lean on him a little bit. So
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's the nice thing too is it's come down, to the level that you expect it to be with Debo and Ayuk back, but there's nobody pushing Jennings. None of these, there's not a fourth wide receiver that is kind of in and out and cutting into him. Ronnie Bell ran routes 14% of the time last week. The only guys running more than 15% of routes last week were Kittle, Ayuk, Jennings, Debo, Juszczyk, and Mason. So the running back, the running backs who have nothing to do with Jennings, and then the tight end and the three wide receivers. So it's nice that you don't have a lot of, in this case, I think it's nice that you don't have a lot of volatility in the inputs for Jennings as far as running routes. That is something that having volatility there can create even more upside, but you still have volatility in exactly how often he's going to be targeted, where on the field he's going to be targeted. All of that still exists, but you don't have as much, barring injury or anything, you don't really have downside risk as far as this week Ronnie Bell ran more routes than Jennings. That doesn't really exist.
Yeah, he's very clearly the wide receiver 3, and and I think he has probably earned himself a little bit of a better role than he had last year. I guess that was what I was about to say. It's just he was so good with Debo out, and it kind of seems like they've used him a little more. 10 targets again since Debo returned, so they have continued to use him. So I don't think it is the far behind the top 2 guy that he was. He was a wide receiver 3 last year. You never even really considered playing him in DFS last year. And then, of course, he did well in the Super Bowl. Now, this year, I kind of think he's shown enough that he's more viable than he was last year. And obviously on a showdown slate, he was always viable. But even at 4,000, looks pretty decent to me. I think he should see some targets. I think I agree with you. Under-owned everywhere, getting a little bit too little ownership, particularly on a slate where we don't have a ton of value or great low owned plays. I think he stands out as
and to your point, he had a higher target share than Ayuk in week 1. He had a higher target share than all of Ayuk, Kittle, and Debo in week 4 when Kittle and Debo came back, you're obviously projecting him to be 4th in target share behind those guys. But like, he's not a like distant 4th here.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we are on the same page. Do you think you're going to go to any other receiver on San Francisco? I think Ronnie Bell, the only one listed here with a projection. I think that is kind of what I see when I look at 49ers stats so far for receivers this year. Like, I don't really think, I think he would be the next best option outside of those top 4 or 3 receivers. I still don't have a ton of interest in Ronnie Bell. Do you have more interest than I do?
No, I mean, he's the one I would go to if I need like a $200 punt and try and get lucky. Like, he's probably the next guy up if one of these guys gets hurt.
Yeah.
So, there's that. Conley didn't run any routes last week. Cowie didn't run any routes last week. So, I think if you are going down the list of Niners receivers, that's where you would go. I'm trying to pull it up now. I don't actually have the injury report in front of me. Is Taylor injured or back? Or last week was the only week he ran routes?
Yeah, he ran 2 routes last week. That's a good question. I don't think that Trent Taylor would play ahead of Ronnie Bell anyway, but
he's on the practice squad.
Okay, yeah. So maybe he'll get called up, and then we can.
Yeah. Cowie and Conley were inactive last week. Taylor was up, ran 5% of routes. Now he's back on the practice squad.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, I think Bell would be the next man up, but again, none of them have received more than 5 or 6 total targets on the year. So really hard to really prioritize any of the other wide receivers on the Niners. I was pulling up the schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. Again, pretty middling matchup for Niners receivers here, and nobody really stands out. Everybody like within 1 fantasy point of expectation. So I don't think we need to factor in like slot versus where they're lining up on the field as far as this goes. I guess we can also look at the wide receiver cornerbacks matchup chart really quickly here. And again, everybody kind of similarly, not a great matchup for any of them. We only have 1 game to choose from. Not a huge issue for me. Okay. Outside of so that's the Niners for you. Seattle, we have DK Metcalf, JSN, Tyler Lockett. Again, nobody else getting more than 5 or 6 targets on the season. Really kind of condensed to those 3 at captain, since I have that pulled up. DK Metcalf, 8% projected ownership. JSN, 4.5% projected ownership. Tyler Lockett, 6.5% projected ownership. So none getting that much captain ownership. And then in the flex, we have DK Metcalf getting 35%, JSN 27%, Tyler Lockett 30%. How do you feel about these numbers? Anybody a big priority for you of the Seattle receivers? How much do you like them?
Yeah, I think this one's more boring than the San Francisco side. I think all 3 are good plays. They all look pretty much correctly owned to me. Lockett probably going the most over-owned, but it's nothing crazy, nothing that is like going to drive me away from him. And it's more so at captain than at flex. But yeah, I think the field's pretty much just got it right here. Like, I have Lockett's flex optimal percentage around 32%. So is his ownership. Debo's flex optimal is around 32%. So is his ownership. JSN around 29%. So is his ownership. So there's nothing like I like them. I think they're guys I'm going to get a lot of, but there's nothing individually that is standing out as far as like, oh, I think the field's making a mistake that I can exploit here. It's more just like, yeah, everybody's very well aware of how these guys project, how they look, and I think it's just going to be played correctly pretty much.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right to me. JSN 27% stands out to me a little bit as something I probably want to get on top of. I was just noticing, so I looked at this yesterday, the schedule adjusted stuff as far as receivers go. Again, pretty middling matchup here for Seattle in general, but the slot being, the spot they've allowed the most schedule adjusted fantasy points. Again, 1.7 over expectation. It's really like not a big enough number. Like, you kind of want to look at the extremes more than the middle, but sort of interested me that they gave up a little bit more to the slot than other spots. I didn't want to read too much into it, but JSN runs 88% from the slot. So it looks to me here as like so it's an above average matchup for JSN. But then I look at this cornerbacks matchup and JSN very much in the red against Lenoir. So I don't know what to make of that exactly. A little bit inconsistent in terms of these metrics for looking at the matchup for JSN. But in general, just the usage has been good enough for JSN that at 7,000, I think I probably come in a little bit above weight to the field. Lock at the price tag 5,400 looks pretty good. I don't know. Yeah, it's I'm trying to like make a case for one of them over the others at ownership, but I think that you are essentially right that the ownership is probably fine on all of these guys, but all look pretty good.
Yep.
Jeremy says JSN matchup terrible. Okay, terrible matchup for JSN. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think the ownership fine for all of them, not a huge priority. You go into any Jake Bobo, Laviska Chenault, anybody else?
I mean, they're in that bucket with, I think, a little bit
Ronnie
behind
Bell.
Garendo even.
Yeah, like, behind Garendo, maybe in the same bucket as Ronnie Bell. Like,
yeah, similar to Bell. Like, I think I'd probably rather go to Bobo than Bell. But he is 5 times more expensive also. Yeah, I think they're pretty similar.
You can see here, here's what I was talking about as far as targets go. Bobo 6 targets on the year, so he is the leading like tertiary receiving option. Yeah, hard to really prioritize that. I think I agree with you though. If I was going to go to one, it would be Bobo over Bell for me as far as these tertiary receiving options. I think he is probably the best there, but certainly not a priority. All right, let's move on and take a look at some tight ends. I see you are you're in chat. That's good to see that you're handling some chat stuff. Wanted to say thank you to Optimal Prime for saying, wait, where was it? Oh, it was maybe a while ago. He said that this is the most helpful show for Showdown out there. Appreciate you, Optimal Prime. Appreciate you all for hanging out with us, supporting us. Again, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the channel. Trying to get to 5,000 by the end of the season. Make sure you subscribe to Endgame Syndicate as well. We often do simulcast to both of these, and Adam does a lot of other content on Endgame Syndicate that is not on the Flannelverse as well. So if you would subscribe to our channels, we would appreciate it. We are trying to be helpful here.
Yeah, and if you're interested in Underdog Battle Royale, this is not being streamed on my channel right now because Nerdy Tenor and Davis and Brick are over there doing Battle Royale stuff. Yeah,
good. It seems like Nerdy Tenor is getting pretty into the Battle Royale stuff. So I haven't actually watched those shows. I probably should at some point because I'm sure it would be. It's always interesting listening to Nerdy Tenor. Definitely something I'll check out at some point. All right, tight ends. George Kittle, far and away the best tight end option. Projects the best here. He's 7,400, coming in at flex ownership of 29%. Captain ownership for Kittle at 5%. We can take a look at the schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Third best matchup as far as schedule adjusted fantasy points. Seattle gives up the third most schedule adjusted fantasy points in the NFL to tight ends. So that's obviously promising for Kittle. Adam, how do you feel about George Kittle?
Yeah, I mean, I think he looks good. Like you said, it's a solid matchup for him. Obviously, he's a legitimate pass catcher. He's not one of these tight ends that you're just saying like, well, if they throw it to a tight end, it'll probably be him. Like he's somebody they actually want to throw the ball to. I think his ownership's pretty efficient. I have him going a little bit over-owned, like very little bit over-owned at flex, very little bit under-owned at captain. So maybe a slight potential edge there if you just want to, play a little bit more Kittle at captain than the field. But, have him optimal at captain about 7% of the time, optimal at flex about 29%. To put that in context, like the flex optimal percentages, between like 28 and 32% for me includes Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, JSN, Lockett. Like he's just in a bucket with these other guys.
Yeah. I think I like Kittle. Yeah, I think Kittle's captain ownership. Like I think I'm going to be significantly over 5% captain ownership on Kittle just because he's always been such a like boom bust profile. Like when he gets going, he'll score 3 touchdowns, just like he always has that in his bag. So I think 5% ownership on Kittle in this nice matchup with Seattle, with few great options like on the low end value options. I think I'll probably lean into be overweight to 5% captain ownership on Kittle.
5%'s low.
Yeah, and then what did I say at flex? It was sub 30%, right? It was 29% at flex feels fine. I'll probably be above that too, but yeah, I think captain I'll be kind of prioritizing Kittle. Looks good there.
Yeah, I like it because I like it at captain too, kind of for the same reasons I was saying about Debo, Like obviously, I think Debo is a better captain than Kittle, but kind of the same reasons. Like you have the potential for Kittle just to draw the most targets on San Francisco in this game. He did it last week. Obviously, can do it again this week. But also, he is somebody that that target distribution, even if he isn't the number one receiver this week, is kind of skewed toward more valuable targets. Like he is obviously a red zone / end zone threat for them. So at captain, that obviously is beneficial, especially when he's going to be 5-6% on.
Yeah, exactly. Any interest in like Eric Saubert? I don't know that I'm going to go there with Kittle back. What was it? Last week we had Saubert 3 routes run with Kittle back. I mean, he was an option when Kittle was out, but I don't know that I have much interest with Kittle back. Do you see it differently? 4 routes run last 2 weeks ago. I don't know. How do you feel about Saubert?
The same way I feel about like Ronnie Bell.
Backup tight end back. Yeah. Where it's just like, if he scores a touchdown, you'll want him. He's probably not going to score a touchdown, but it's going to happen at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. Like guys that I have being optimal in flex between 1.5% and 2.5% of the time. Ronnie Bell, Saubert, Chenault, Bobo, Barner, Farrell Brown. Like guys that are going to be active, they'll probably step on the field and maybe they will randomly score a touchdown.
Yep. I think that is exactly what you have in Eric Saubert. What about the other side of the game? We talk about like the better value options. I would put Noah Fant in that bucket just based on his usage so far this year. Noah Fant, 4th on the Seahawks in route participation, 61.9% on the year, 18 targets on the year, also 4th there. So he's kind of in that like tier before the break to the like real dart throws. Still obviously behind the 3 receivers. As far as schedule adjusted fantasy points matchup, San Francisco is a below average matchup for tight ends so far this year. I don't know. What's your level of interest in Noah Fant?
I think he's good. I think he's a step behind Charbonnet for me as far as values go. But I think so. Like of the sub 4K skill players, I think Charbonnet is the best value. I think Fant is second, and then I think there's a drop from Charbonnet to Fant, and I think there's a big drop from Fant to like everybody else. And I'm excluding kickers and defenses there. I think Fant is similar to like the kickers and defenses as far as optimal percentage for the most part. So like I think he looks pretty good. If I can find the salary for Charbonnet and ownership or lineup construction or whatever allows for it, I'd rather play Charbonnet. But Fant does just look good. Ran route 67% of the time last week. That's pretty much in line with what he's done every week this year outside of week 4 when he did get a little bit banged up, only ran 52% of routes. That was the Barner week. But last week was back to normal. Barner ran routes 10% of the time. Farrell Brown ran routes 8% of the time, 67% for Fant. Still clearly the tight end one here.
Yep. And I mean, projected for only 13% ownership, which to me that feels a little bit light on Noah Fant. Do you think he'll be above 13%? Do you have ownership similar there?
I have 15. I have him projected for 15. I have him optimal about 14. I think that like 10 to 20 range makes a lot of sense, both as far as, where the field will probably be at and where I'd probably be at, because again, I view it as, pretty efficient. I don't think I'm getting like a really big edge by just like slamming Noah Fant or anything, but I do think he's obviously one of the more likely value plays to succeed.
Yep. That's exactly how I see it. Like we don't have that many great like value options. He's one of those like in that tier of like, he's clearly going to be on the field, should see some opportunities, more likely to score a touchdown than the guys who only come in for a few plays. So I kind of like it. I'll probably be above weight to the field just because we have so few value options and he is coming in at relatively low ownership. But like you said, it's not like it's standing out as a like he should be significantly higher. It's just he's relatively low, so I'll take my shots there on Noah Fant. I saw somebody already brought up AJ Barner. We have AJ Barner, Farrell Brown as the options here. You already kind of alluded to it. Just looking at last week's numbers, AJ Barner. That's for the season. Let's see here. Let me pull it up. But like no real usage when Noah Fant is healthy. Last week we had Farrell Brown ran 4 routes, 8% route participation. AJ Barner ran 5 routes, 10%. I mean, that's just one different route. No one target for each of them. I think that's kind of what you expect here. Similar to Saubert, just not really involved.
Yeah. And when you look at Barner's routes this year, it's kind of misleading. Like if you just look at them, like he ran routes 21% of the time in week 1, 29% of the time in week 4. There's probably a tendency to think that like his ceiling's a little bit higher than it is. But week 1, Pharaoh Brown didn't play. Week 4 was the week that Fant got hurt mid-game and missed a pretty nice chunk of time. In the weeks where we've had 2 games where Brown is active and Fant isn't hurt, 10.8 and 9.8% of routes run for Barner. Even week 2, where you didn't have Brown, he ran routes 10.5% of the time. I think his route participation is probably actually pretty stable around that 10% mark, assuming that both of these guys are healthy and playing. So he just is firmly in that bucket, along with Pharaoh Brown. Maybe they run some weird design play for him from the 4-yard line and he scores, or maybe he replicates the play that he had, week 3 or 4, where he just takes it like 40 yards down the sideline or whatever he did. Like, he'll be on the field for some plays. He probably won't do anything.
Yep. Same page as far as the tight ends go. Pretty relatively straightforward. You mentioned defense kickers. We should talk about those a little bit because that is kind of interesting. Justin Steele here, Chicago Cubs All-Star, telling me that I should go down one more button on the flannel. So I'll do it for Justin. I gotta say, this flannel, it's like the where the buttons line up. It's just like awkward. So it's like if I do it up here, it's like it just like gets too. I don't really like things touching my neck, so I am always a little bit more unbuttoned. But apparently, still not unbuttoned enough. That was the one comment I got on my last video. Was like a couple hours after, or maybe it was right after. I don't know, but it was after I was done with the video. Got the comment under it saying, more chest hair, less talk about the 1991 lockout or something like that. And I was like, I don't understand this reference. Like, clearly making a reference to, I think, something I said, but I have no idea what you're talking about. But anyway, the chest hair part, I understood. People want more chest hair. I get it. I'll give the people what they want. Okay. Defenses and kickers, Adam. Matthew Wright stepping in as the kicker for the 49ers with Jake Moody hurt. I think we can talk about kickers and defenses just as a group. I mean, we can split them up individually. We can talk about, kind of prioritizing. Are there any major priorities? We have the Niners coming in at flex, 14.5% ownership. Matthew Wright coming in at 12%. Seahawks at 11%, and Jason Myers at 11%. So pretty low ownership for a game where we don't have great value options. Kind of seems like we're getting lower ownership than I would expect for the defensive kickers. Is that how you're seeing it, or do you think the field has it about right?
I think they have it about right. I have Matthew Wright's optimal percentage a bit lower than the other 3, but still, I think that's, because he's 4,600 and I don't know, maybe a little bit under projected here. Maybe that comes up for me a little bit as the day goes on. But for the most part, I think that they all look pretty similar. The defenses and Myers, at least, 10 to 16% projected ownership, basically 10 to 15% chance of being optimal. I don't think anything individually from that group stands out. But I think obviously they are all playable. And like you said, we don't have a ton of value. So these guys, I kind of mentioned it before, but these guys are kind of in a bucket to me with Noah Fant as far as, so they are a little bit more expensive than Fant. You have, I just lost the page, but you have, Myers is 2K more than Fant. The Niners defense is 1,200 more. Seahawks is 800 more. But that's factored in when I talk about optimal percentage. They all kind of just fall into that 10 to 15% bucket where, as far as quote unquote value plays go, they're behind Charbonnet, they're behind Jennings, they're ahead of, the backup running backs and tight ends.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think I might put them actually. So maybe a slight quibbling here, but I think I probably would put them in the same bucket as Charbonnet and Fant. Maybe behind Charbonnet.
That's right.
Right with right Fant. So maybe we are on the same page, I guess, as far as the defense kickers. I think they look like pretty solid options. I think I'm going to come in overweight to the field just because, the ownership feels a little bit light to me. So you think that this seems about right? All of them coming in sub 15%. It sort of stood out to me on a slate where we don't really have much value, getting relatively low ownership. So I do have a good amount of interest, but it is always the struggle of I don't know which I have the most interest in. Right. I have interest in the defense. I know I want some defensive kickers. I don't have a strong I need to go to this defense or this kicker. It's not like that kind of thing. But I think I probably end up over 15% on all of them. So at least a little bit higher than the field.
Yeah. And so I think that the part where it gets interesting is when you start thinking about playing against your opponents. And getting payoffs in large field tournaments. I think when you're just talking about, range of outcomes for these different plays, that they are pretty much efficiently owned, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to play more of them within like your specific tournament strategy, because you are going to get a lot of ownership going to, the concentrated receivers here and the quarterbacks and all that. And if this is a game where the kickers and defenses do well, most likely those players that people are paying up for and playing a lot of aren't doing as well. So you do get some negative correlation there that you can potentially take advantage of. And that would be something that does potentially make you want to play defenses and kickers more. But just from a, how often are they optimal type thing, I think the field's pretty much got it right.
Yeah. This is also, so, and we're doing the show a little bit quicker than usual because we don't have that many great options on the show. Like it's basically like you have the main guys on every team. They're viable. We like them to different degrees. Don't really love many of the like backups. The tertiary options just look pretty meh today, like not all that interesting. So with that said, with so few options on the slate, so few like interesting backup tertiary options, are you more inclined to, do you think you'll be leaving more salary on the table, doing different things to get unique, quarterback against defense, that kind of stuff, like in order to avoid dupes? Do you think you need to go out of your way to do kind of pull some of those other levers?
I actually think it might be a little bit easier to avoid dupes on a slate like this, because you don't have, like, the other reason this show went so quickly is we don't really have injuries that we had to talk about.
True.
And guess at, who's going to benefit. When you get a slate where like Christian McCaffrey just got ruled out, you get Jordan Mason 80% because he's clearly underpriced and all that. Here you have a slate where the teams have been healthy for the most part. Obviously the Niners aren't healthy, but that's been the case all season. So pricing is pretty efficient. Like, there's 2 players on the entire slate projected for more than 50% flex ownership, and it's the 2 quarterbacks. There's 5 guys projected for at least 10% captain ownership. Nobody above 15%. Or sorry, 6 guys at 10%. Nobody above 15%. Then you also have like Debo and Kittle getting 5 to 10% captain ownership. So I think it's actually, because of pricing being efficient or close to efficient in most cases, there's not these value plays that are just like jumping out and going to be in everybody's lineup. So I think duping might actually, it's still obviously going to happen in your large field stuff, but I think it might be a little bit easier to just make lineups that aren't super heavily duped, because you have fewer great options, but you have a lot of good options.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I guess we do have a lot of like pretty good, like, and you have like even like shades of value, like Tyler Lockett 5,400 is sort of a strong value option. JSN 7,000 looks pretty good. So yeah, we do have like it is kind of an interesting slate from that perspective. Yeah, maybe you can avoid dupes to some extent while still playing the best plays. We were talking about before the show, like I'm as part of my expert survey for RotoGrinders, I get asked the question, what's the game script you like to build for? And the answer that I gave, and I do think that it's kind of an interesting like way to build, would be like defenses and running backs. Like I said, I think Kenneth Walker, they keep talking about getting the ball, so I like the idea of building for a like Kenneth Walker just pounding the rock, slowing the game down, and then including obviously Seattle defense. That's kind of the correlation everybody goes to with the running back, but I think it makes some sense. Do you have a particular game script that you think you want to build for? I know this is not how you build either, but do you have any thought to like?
Yeah, like I'll say that, and I kind of mentioned it before, I think it's interesting to build for the, what if this is a 13-10 game and, or 21-14, whatever, and have kickers, defenses, just because people aren't going to really go that route on this game. It's a game that people expect points to be scored. There's a bunch of receivers that they want to click on, a bunch of running backs they want to click on. So I think that's like an interesting route to go. I assume for the most part, I go the route of just like playing the good players and hoping that the game goes that way.
I think me too.
Yeah, but like just, it is a slate where I can look at it and say, like, I know how everybody wants to play this slate, and obviously you could just play it the opposite way and probably get paid off a decent amount of time. But also kind of assume that I'm not going to go that way. And also to answer Optimal Prime's question, he said, when I said if the lineup structure allows it, I was talking about Charbonnet versus Fant. Do I mean to say, even though I have the salary left for a player, if he doesn't correlate with the lineup game script, don't play him? I meant it in a sense of, like, for me, I'm not really concerned in a given lineup if I have like Charbonnet plus Walker, but like you might be. So I just kind of meant it in the sense of like, if you don't care, if for some reason you don't want Charbonnet in that lineup, like Fant would be the next guy. I didn't really mean anything like super specific.
Okay. Yep. Makes sense. I thought I had another Do you care at all? This game is in Seattle. Like, I think they're like, it's known for being like a pretty good stadium for Seattle. Like they do better at home than on the road historically because of the crowd noise, etc. Does that affect you at all? Does that make you any more interested in like the Seattle side versus the Niner side? Is that something you factor in at all?
No, not really. I mean, it should, for the most part, be baked into lines. Like, it's everybody knows this game's in Seattle. Everybody knows, teams. I guess, I don't know. I don't have numbers in front of me like to quantify it, but
Yeah,
that should mostly be baked in. And then
yeah,
like when I kind of try and think about how because there will be nuanced stuff a lot of times that like isn't necessarily baked into a line from like a distribution standpoint. Like in baseball, we talk about it with two teams have a 5 implied total, but one team hits a lot of home runs and one doesn't. So from a DFS standpoint, those aren't equal. But like when I think about something like this, I have a hard time even thinking of like what I would do, what I would even want to adjust. Like, maybe the Niners are going to have more false start penalties? I have no idea how. Like, yeah, can't get fantasy points out of that. I don't know.
Yeah. I was trying to like part of my narrative because I was forced to write a narrative. It was like, well, maybe because they're at home, they'll be better defensively and cause, maybe there'll be more penalties. So maybe plays into like a Kenneth Walker low scoring game kind of output. But yeah, it's
right. Yeah.
it's
Like if you wanted to, like that would be, I guess, the angle would going back to like if you wanted to play defenses and kickers and you just wanted some sort of like anecdotal narrative to like make you feel better about it. Yeah. Maybe they are really loud and,
yeah. If you need to justify your takes with anecdotes, then I guess that's one way to do it. Okay. We did it. I think we've talked about every good play on the slate. Do you have any other thoughts on this slate?
No.
Where else can people find you? What else do you have coming up?
Endgame YouTube, like we talked about, Endgame website. We have good stuff over there in general. Some extra content coming out. We just did Brick, Nerdy, and Shady Advice. Did part 1 of, we're doing a community series with some of our subscribers. We have really smart, good players in Discord. So we've been talking to some of them. Shady did, I think it was like an hour and a half with Brick and Nerdy, just talking about a lot of kind of in-depth stuff for him. I got a lot out of that, learned a lot, have some stuff to think about and work on. Utica is putting up a video in the next day or two. He recorded his week 5 lineup building process. So he's editing that down and going to release that video, showing what he does. We will have a video coming up, me and Yuta, in the next week or so, talking about some NBA stuff that we like to look at, publicly available stuff that we use. Also going to be doing part 2 of the community series with BP Colonia in the next week or two. So we have a lot of good stuff coming out. We already have a lot of good stuff up over there. So definitely check that out. And then my NFL data is available through my Dub Club. If for whatever reason, the end game price point doesn't make sense with your DFS play, but you want access to, data that I use and my weekly notes and stuff like that, that's available as well.
All right. Yep. Go check that out if you haven't already done so. All right. Optimal Prime asking me for a Neil's Nobodies. He said, if you didn't say a player under 1K that's playable tonight, the only player 1K or under, if you include 1K, that I think might be in my player pool and still probably not would be Jake Bobo. This is not a slate with great value. I think I'm probably going to be avoiding that range in general. But yeah, I think Isaac Guerendo, as far as like sub 10% ownership guys, Isaac Guerendo kind of stands out to me as somebody that I will consider. Yeah, I think that's it. Do you see anybody else? I mean, Seahawks are right at 11%. Seahawks defense, I think those kind of stand out to me. But again, no like great standout, like really low owned plays. Is it kind of the same for you, Adam?
Yeah, like it's just a bunch of 1.5% to 2% or 2.5% like optimal guys for me that probably won't really show up much. Like, yeah, Bobo, Ronnie Bell, I guess would be the top of the list.
Yeah, if you have to go that range, that would be the list. All right. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the channel. Trying to get to 5,000 subscribers. Would appreciate it. Go check out the Endgame Syndicate channel. A lot of good stuff there. Make sure you're subscribed there as well, because Adam's got a lot of great content coming out. I will be back tonight, 90 minutes prior to lock, breaking down this whole slate once again. So come join me for that. Thank you all for hanging out with us, and we will catch you next time.